Hello. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to the concept of the note essay and what is expected in these particular essays. You'll notice by looking at the syllabus that you do quite a number of these, and so I'm hoping that this video will clarify what I am expecting. To begin, let's talk about what a literary analysis is, because your note essays will be a type of literary analysis. Now, a literary analysis is not a rhetorical analysis. That is the type of document that you probably wrote in 101 or 102 or perhaps CRE 101, where you took a essay generally or a text and you sort of took it apart and talked about the pros and cons. A literary analysis is also not a summary of the plot of a book or a story or a poem, nor is it a reflection on it. That's a book report or a book review. And those you write in other classes, you were probably very comfortable writing those in high school. Now, that's not what a literary analysis is. A literary analysis is a type of argument where you analyze the elements of a work, such as the language or the perspective, the structure of the text, and then you explain how the author uses literary devices to create effects and convey ideas. Now, I want to reinforce the statement that explain how the author uses literary devices to create effects and convey ideas. Many students come to this class being very comfortable analyzing or pointing out the point of view or where the climax of the story is, or they can talk about the characterization and whether or not characters are round characters, or they can explain what symbols appear in the book. But they don't go the extra step to explain how the author uses those devices to support a theme or to convey an overwhelming effect. That is where we need to go in the literary analysis. I want you to pause the video here and take a moment to read the two paragraphs. Now, keep in mind that your goal in a literary analysis is not to simply retell the story. I've read it. I guarantee you I'm very familiar with it. Your goal is to explain how the text works on a deeper level. Read the first paragraph, which is not an analysis. Then read the second paragraph, which is. You'll note in the first paragraph, really, the author simply tells us what happens in the lottery. You shouldn't be at all surprised by this paragraph because you're familiar with the story. On the other hand, the second paragraph tells us something new and different. Notice that it focuses on the effect that the writer uses, that Jackson uses contrast to create shock and horror. And then the writer gives us examples and explains how that does that. Now, both of these are student paragraphs. The first one got a C-. This one got an A. You are looking for toward writing an analysis, not telling me what the story is about. Which leads us into what is a note essay. Now, a note essay is a short essay that answers a specific question that's posed about a work. Note essays are sometimes called paragraph essays or response essays, and they can range from a single paragraph to a very short essay, but the key there is that they are very brief. In other words, a note essay is never over 500 words. Note essays rely on your insight and your analysis skills. They don't incorporate additional research. If you're going to do additional research, then you're building a full-on essay. And the only evidence that should be taken is from the text itself. Since you're dealing with one novel or one particular short story and nothing else, a works cited is not important. The note essay is very focused. It typically focuses on one very specific aspect of a novel, short story, poem, etc. Even though the essay has to be focused enough to be thorough but brief. Whereas a full essay might want to talk about characterization, point of view, and symbols. A note essay would only focus on one of those. Indeed, a note essay might only focus on one particular symbol. Note essays are usually assigned as essay questions or take-home essays or reflections or blog entries because they allow writers to demonstrate their ability to read closely, and they demonstrate their understanding of literary structure. Note essays are always literary analysis essays. Just because they are short and maybe even only 250 words, there still needs to be the process of analysis echoed in the note essay. They will have an introduction, thesis, body paragraph, and conclusion. If they are only one paragraph in length, they might have an introductory hook statement. Then you have your discussion point, which would be your thesis. You build your body paragraph and a summary statement. Or they could be short parts, a very short introduction, maybe one or two, maybe even 3 body paragraphs if they're briefly explained, and then a conclusion. And as I said before, note essays are generally written as parts of essay exams in university literature classes. This is one of the reasons why we practice them, because as you get into your 300 and 400 level lit classes, or as you get into graduate school, you'll find that these are one of the most common ways that you illustrate your and demonstrate your understanding of a topic. Now for me, I prefer that you do not write single paragraph note essays. I want you to write them as brief essays. So your note essay will have 3 parts. You'll have an introduction, of course you will have your body, and then you're going to have your conclusion. And we're going to break that up. So the first part of the note essay will be your introduction. Now when you write your introduction, I want you to start with some sort of a hook statement that sets the context for what you're writing. I don't want a full-blown introduction with lots of context and background and so forth. You just need to sort of set the context for why you're writing the essay. You will then follow with a thesis statement that directly answers the question, states your stand, and possibly gives the direction the essay will take. I don't think that it's necessary to blueprint reasons in a note essay because the essay is so short. But you may give the direction that the essay will take. For example, you might say that you're going to focus on symbols so that I know then that everything that is within the essay is going to be regarding symbols. Or you may say that you're going to focus on symbol and characterization. Or maybe you're going to say you're going to focus on 2 symbols, but I don't need full-on blueprints of reasons or discussion points or topic sentences or whatever vocabulary you learned in 101 and 102. Keep in mind that note essays are written in response to a question. They're going to assume that the reader is familiar with the text. So a background summary of the story is unnecessary as your traditional hook. You just want to set the context of what you're going to talk about. And it is possible that you can simply begin the essay with the thesis statement. That's not my preferred way of doing it, but it is possible that in a note essay that you would do that. The body paragraph the body is going to be made up of your developmental paragraphs. Now you have to have at least one body paragraph. However, you may have more. What you need to remember is you should have one paragraph per point. Your points then should be supported with textual evidence and interpretation of that evidence. That means that you need to explain what the quote that you're using or the evidence that you're using, what it means and how it relates to your greater point. And it's useful to follow the P technique: supporting point, evidence, elaboration. Now you should have seen videos and heard explanations of this earlier in the module. Finally, you're going to have your conclusion. Your conclusion should be one, maybe two statements that wraps up the essay and signals that you have come to an end of the analysis. I know that in English 101 and 102, you were taught the 3 R's: remind the reader, reword the thesis, remind the reader of your reasons, and then relate to the reader. In a note essay, you are simply doing 1, basically, and perhaps 2. So what you will do in your conclusion statement or statements is reference your thesis and body of the essay without simply repeating what you've already said. It's not good form to go back and rewrite it exactly, but to have the same general meaning, you're bringing it to a sense of closure. Now I'm going to walk you through how to look at a note essay. And in order to do this, I'm going to use my example from the short story Everyday Use by Alice Walker. I have copied the link to the short story Everyday Use by Alice Walker if you're not familiar with it. So you might want to stop the video and go back and scan the short story. However, I think you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about as we move through the note essay. Now, the first thing that you want to do is you, of course, have to have a thesis statement. I'm going to walk you through some paragraphs and some points in how you develop that by doing that. And the examples that I'm going to give you are going to tie back to this particular thesis. So the thesis statement is, although Dee and Alice Walker's everyday use appears to be a strong character, her insecurity is revealed by her hatred of her family's home, as well as her treatment of her friends and her relatives. So notice here that we have the topic of the essay, which is going to be Dee. So every point and every paragraph should focus on Dee. Not particularly interested in the other characters, Mama or Maggie. And everything that we talk about should tie back to her insecurity. So Dee and insecurity are underlined here because these are keywords that you're going to want to repeat frequently throughout your points and your explanations, or synonyms, of course. And it looks here as though we're going to have 3 major points. We're going to see her hatred of her family's home, and we have 2 major points, I suppose. Treatment of her friends and relatives. We might split treatment into friends and relatives. That may be possible. Now, as we're developing these ideas, we're going to want to consider the P pattern. So let's look at our first. But before we do that, let me reinforce what P stands for. P, or the point, they introduce what upcoming piece of evidence means. The evidence that supports your thesis statement. What is the point that you're trying to make? Why does that show that Dee is insecure? The evidence is the details from the text that led you to the conclusion that you express in your point. Evidence should be easy to pick out because it's always going to be quoted, or they're going to be specific concrete details from the story, or from the poem, or from the novel. And then the most important aspect is the elaboration. The elaboration explains how that evidence relates to the point and provides insight about the significance of the point to the thesis as a whole. Now, I want to step back and to refer back to English 101 and 102. If you took English 101 or 102 here at Scottsdale, you learned this particular technique. It was called different things, perhaps. For example, if you took Dr. Jared Aragona, he refers to P as pi, point, illustration, explanation. If you took it under myself, or if you took it with perhaps Cameron McElvey, you're familiar with C, supporting reason, evidence, explanation. Other instructors may use GEC, general statement, explanation, commentary. Some people use PEA, point, evidence, analysis. There are different acronyms that instructors use, but the technique is always the same. You start with the point that you want to make. You provide the evidence that led you to draw that conclusion or to make that point. And then you explain how that evidence supports that point and provides insight into your thinking process. Okay, now let's apply that to the story. Point. Dee's lack of confidence, notice lack of confidence is a synonym for insecurity, so we have tied that back to our thesis, is revealed by her reaction to a family tragedy. Evidence. Mama remembers that 12 years earlier, when she struggled to save her daughter Maggie from their burning house, Dee stood under a tree watching with a look of concentration on her face. "Why don't you do a dance around the ashes?" I'd wanted to ask her. She hated the house that much. Now, how does that reaction show a lack of confidence? You may be tempted to just tell me that it does. So a weak elaboration would be, Dee shows her insecurity by her extreme hatred of her house. That's what I would call a pronouncement. And you might see me write the comment, saying it don't make it so. The key of an elaboration is to explain the how. A stronger elaboration would be, Dee does nothing to help her family because her greater concern is being rid of the house. Since the house shows the world their poverty, Dee is more concerned about the destruction of the symbol of her shame than she is about the loss of the family home and her sister's burns. Take a look at the second point, Dee's insecurity. Notice how we're tying those keywords back to the thesis. Take a moment and read the evidence and the elaborations. Finally, a third example. Dee shows the strongest sign of her lack of self-esteem, insecurity, by insulting her mother and sister. Take a few moments and read the evidence and the elaborations. Now, if I were writing this in a note essay, I would make each one of these points a separate paragraph. Notice that they would be very brief paragraphs, and they all supported the thesis statement that I gave you at the end. Then I would simply have to add my context statement, and I would add my conclusion statement. Now, the next assignment that you will have is I have given you a copy of a note essay and ask you to analyze it, reflecting the parts of the note essay and the P pattern. Use that as a sort of template to follow when you're writing the note essays provided that you'll be submitting in class. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Good luck.